some people won't get involved in ministry because they feel like their past has defined them. You stay out of the arena of serving the Lord because you're shamed by your backstory. Instead, your backstory is your power. It's your superpower. It's your leverage. It's what you use to say, I was lost, but now I'm found. You may remember Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was the head coach of the championship Chicago Bulls during the 1990s. He had Michael Jordan. He had Scottie Pippen. He had Dennis Rodman, and he had trophies upon trophies. He knew what it was to build a team. Here's what he said about a team. He said, good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the me for the we. Good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the me for the we. That, I think, is appropriate in the marketplace as we build teams. It's appropriate here in the church as we build teams. It's appropriate, of course, on the Little League fields or the basketball courts that our children, the teams that they play on. It's appropriate in your marriage as you come together as a team. When the me gets in the way of the we got a problem. Jesus is assigning a team to go out and to declare his good news. Now recall last week, Matthew, the gospel writer, describes Jesus going throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. He's been healing their diseases. He's been meeting them where they are and soothing their afflictions. Then as we saw last week, in verse 36 of chapter 9, Jesus is moved. Listen to what Matthew says. It says in Matthew 9:36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. That word compassion means he ached in his inner being. He was moved by what he saw, and he chose to take action. He chose to get involved. Now, as Jesus feels this, what does he say to his disciples? Notice verses 37 and 38 of Matthew chapter 9. It says, then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Jesus sees need all around him. And as he does this, he says, look, before we do anything else, we need to pray. Before we take any action, before we deploy out, before we go anywhere or do anything, pray earnestly that the Lord of the harvest would raise up the laborer for the harvest. At the end of this service, I'm going to invite you forward. Maybe you can kneel, maybe you can just stand, but I'm going to ask you to come and join me right here before the Lord in prayer for a harvest this week and this summer. Now notice, all of this is the context of what happens as we step into chapter 10. Look at Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. Remember, Christ now is recruiting his team. He's about to get his team activated. So look at how he builds Team Jesus here, all right? Matthew 10, 1 through 4, it says, and he called to him the 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So this is the summation of who all is going to be involved and what they're going to be doing. Now notice two things. First, what are they doing? They're doing exactly what they saw Jesus doing. They've observed him preaching and teaching and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and then healing diseases. This is in verse 35 of chapter 9. Then he commissions them. Now, in Mark's gospel, we're going to see it look a little different. Notice how Mark captures this moment. Mark 3, 13, 14, and 15. It says, and he went up on the mountainside and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. So notice this version of the story. Mark appointed the 12, and what does it say in parentheses? Whom he named apostles, so that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. So two things here that are a little different than Matthew's story. First, they're tasked not only to cast out demons and heal disease, but also to preach. Right? It says, I think in Matthew's gospel, they announce the kingdom. Here it says they are there to preach. See, remember this, guys. God uses preaching to move hearts. As faith comes by what? That's good. Faith comes from hearing. Faith comes from hearing. God uses the preached, proclaimed word to move the heart. Faith comes by hearing. Now, we're a very educated society. We have all sorts of Bibles and translations, and I mean, there's on our devices and apps, and I can't tell you how many Bibles I have. Most pastors around the world don't even have a full copy of the Word of God. And most of the congregants can't read. So God uses the proclamation of the Word of God to move hearts, to equip people, to disciple, to move them to, and so these apostles are going to be sent out to preach. And secondly, notice they're called apostles. The term apostle means sent one. So this is inferred in Matthew, but specifically noted in Mark. So these first ones on Team Jesus, they're sent to proclaim the kingdom as he was proclaiming the kingdom. The second thing about this that I want you to see is that the team, who the team is. Look at verses 2, 3, and 4 of Matthew chapter 10. The names of the 12 apostles are first Simon, who's called Peter. Now, he's going to be listed first because he's going to have such a massive role in the establishment of the church from Pentecost on, right? So Peter's kind of the leader. So these are first Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. Notice what Matthew says of himself. James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. As you read this, don't just skate through this. Stop for a moment and notice what Matthew is saying, in particular about a few of these disciples. Notice some descriptors here. Simon, who is called Peter. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. They were called the sons of what? You know? The sons of thunder. I mean, these were bold, strong, mighty men. Then you see one called Simon the Zealot. Matthew speaks of himself as Matthew the tax collector. And then he notes Judas Iscariot, who would betray him. See, these descriptors speak a testimony, something specific about each one as the descriptor is added. Simon, who is called Peter. Remember when Jesus is asking his disciples, who do you say that I am? Who do they say that I am? Or some say this, that, and the other. Who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Bar-Jonah, Simon Bar-Jonas, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And on this rock, Peter, you shall be called Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. When you see Simon is called Peter, you kind of go back to that moment where he just boldly stepped out and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You have the words of life. We're not going to anybody else. And then you see some of these other descriptors. Matthew says of himself, Matthew, the tax collector. What's he doing? Why is he saying that? We've seen that story. Why is he always saying, and Matthew the tax collector? Because intuitive to ministry is testimony. He is proclaiming, my life is very different now because I follow Jesus. I was a thief. I betrayed my fellow countrymen. I stole from them. I worked for the oppressor against my fellow countrymen. I was a wicked tax collector. But my life is different now that I follow Jesus. See, some people won't get involved in ministry because they feel like their past has defined them. You appreciate the grace of Jesus that's been given to you, but you stay out of the arena of serving the Lord because you're shamed by your backstory. Instead, your backstory is your power. It's your superpower. It's your leverage. It's what you use to say, I was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. I was dead, but now I live. I was a stinking tax collector, but I met Jesus. He changed me. What's your testimony, friend? What's your story? Even today, you may be walking through some challenging times that have happened to you or that you have or are authoring. God can use that if you bring him your story. Notice this other descriptor, verse 4. What does it say about Judas? Matthew 10:4, Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, what does it say? Who betrayed him. Judas was on the team, but his story is one of unfaithfulness. See, as Matthew writes his gospel, he's looking back at the story he got to live. And I'm sure along the way, I'm sure he's looking at all these guys and he's like, man, that guy, Simon the Zealot. Or the Zealot, whatever his name is, right? Simon the Zealot, I got it right. He's amazing. And John, James and John, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure along the way, he gets to Judas and he's like, this guy's awesome. Treasurer, CPA, finance guy. Uses Excel spreadsheets. Now, Excel spreadsheets will kill vision all the time. Oh my goodness. Got to answer all these questions before I can even take a step. But Judas, this guy's with us. He'll never walk away from Jesus. What does it say of his story? Judas Iscariot, who would betray him. See, your future is still unwritten. And the question we have to ask when we see that is, will I stay faithful? Will I stay faithful to my Lord? Will I stay faithful to his church? Will I stay faithful to the task? Will I stay faithful to the covenant I took before God? As I stood before God with my bride, as I stood before God with my husband, will I be faithful? Or will I betray him? In this section, we see this note about Judas, and we have to talk about the enemy. Because as you read the story, he's enticed. See, we talk about the enemy coming against us, and we think spiritual attack. We're attacked when the enemy comes against us. And that's our language. Well, I'm just under attack. And oftentimes we are. He loves to disrupt, to steal, to kill and destroy, to create chaos, to create confusion. You're under spiritual attack. That's one of the ways he attacks you. But how did Satan attack Jesus? He enticed him. One of the ways we get attacked by the enemy is we get enticed by the enemy. He puts something in front of us, we're like, ooh, I'd like that. I'd love to have that. I would love to. And Judas the treasurer loved money more than he loved his Lord. And the enemy knew this, and he came at him from this perspective. Be careful by what you allow to entice you. If you're being enticed and you keep being enticed and you start to succumb to that enticement, you're going to walk away from your Lord. You're going to walk away from the things he tells you to be faithful to. That's why you need others. That's why you need a team. That's why you need to be on a team. That's why you need to be raw with the team you're on. That's why you need to say, brother, come alongside me. Pastor, I need your help. We need your counsel. Why? Because the enemy can entice you, and before you know it, all he needs is a foothold, the Word of God says. All he needs is to be able to grab hold of your ankle. Doesn't need to blow you up like a linebacker hitting a running back through the middle hole. No, he just wants to grab your ankle, and then everybody else piles on. So he can entice you. Here's the question. Is your me bigger than we? That's a starting point. Pride is the root, friend. If your me is bigger than we, your pride is in the way. Number two, are you being enticed away from faithfulness to Jesus? And number three, are you building spiritual disciplines to strengthen you against the enemy's attack? Because he will come. He hates you and will come at you. Are you preparing for that fight?